All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Sean Nahavik with Plant Moran. Welcome to Hot Topics and Trends in Construction. Insight is valuable to our success, personally and professionally, of course. And at Plant Moran, we understand that there are many areas where your success demands industry insight. And for example, the talent strategy, COVID resources, leadership mentoring, tax policy changes, right up our alley, and operating in the digital and virtual world. Insight is valuable when you are engaged with professionals that have a firsthand knowledge of your challenges, both seen and unseen. So this morning, we're bringing you two individuals, Kate Strauss, attorney at partner with Galvanize Law Group, and Nick Williams, director of operations, Absolute Caulking and Waterproofing. Two people who know and understand the challenges of the construction industry. They are boots on the ground, so to speak, so bring experience and education to this discussion. We cannot cover all topics and trends in this discussion, but Kate and Nick will focus on the resolutions to client and customer challenges and work through contract language and documentation to ensure communication is clear and all parties have a shared understanding. Customer satisfaction is the key to our business success, and it all begins with the shared understanding. Kate and Nick, we look forward to the discussion, so take it away from here.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to be here. Sean, thanks for the warm introduction as well. I think I've had the pleasure of meeting and talking with a lot of the people that are in our session here today. I look forward to meeting new people as well. Nick, thank you so much for co-presenting with me here today.
Happy to be here.
I'm going to see if I can get my screen share going. I can. All right. You guys should be able to see this, I hope, as we move it along.
We're good.
Shall we jump in? So Nick and I decided that it would be an interesting and timely topic to talk about where everybody is at on pandemic cost escalation and delay issues. And, from a contract attorney portion of the world, I thought we could talk about the different clauses that we deal. Oh, look, there's us, Nick. The clauses that I deal with in terms of helping people make sure that they're protecting their rights and ability to get change orders in place, both on the escalation cost side of the world as well as the delay issue side of the world. But there's also a lot of real world kind of considerations and solutions that Nick and I were talking about that he deals with in his role as the operations, what are you? Director of operations for Absolute Caulking and Waterproofing.
Yeah, we see no shortage of issues tied to the many things that are going on around the world, not to mention wars and pandemics. A crazy time we live in, and we're going to dig into all that stuff today.
I think you hit a good point too. For so many of us, we were like, yay, the pandemic's over. And nobody was really expecting that now we'd have a global conflict. So it's like we're all still in this hovering kind of when will we hit a new normal kind of time period.
What I hope to bring to the table, just so everyone on the call and understands, is I'm here to present real world solutions and to teach and inform anyone who's in the same position or a similar position to make this our problem and not so much a we problem. When we're able to get the client or the owner or others who have a vested interest in the success of the project on the same page as us, with owned liability and ownership with regards to costs, it quickly becomes much more of a collaborative environment. And so we're going to talk about some of those strategies and techniques.
I think you also are hitting on something that's a much broader theme that a lot of us are struggling with right now, which is in a post-pandemic or quasi-post-pandemic world. It's been my experience that to some extent people have forgotten how to people a little bit, that it's a little more combative. It's a little bit more us versus you. It's a little bit harder to figure out how to bridge some of the communication barrier. And the more you can turn the conversation into an our problem conversation, the more success I think you have. But it's also about helping people kind of humanize again. And I don't know if you've been experiencing that in your own business world.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's across all platforms and sectors. I think it's the economy in general. I think, yeah, as everyone went into our own little hole over the last 2 years, uh, obviously the socializing and discussions and humanizing, empathy, sympathy went right out the window. I mean, there was a lot of, I gotta protect my unit. And now that we're somewhat coming out of this, it's you're starting to have discussions about, okay, what do we all do together, rather than everyone on their own little lily pad. So yeah, it's been I don't know what you would call it, excellent, but at the same time extremely frustrating, because yeah, it seems like we've forgotten that secondary language.
Yep, absolutely. I do want to invite everybody who's with us today to be in the Q&A section or the chat section. Probably the chat section is the better one for the session. So as Nick and I are talking, if you want to drop questions in on the chat so that we can be responding in real time and make it as much of a conversation as possible, we welcome that kind of feedback. All right, so the way we have our presentation laid out today was to talk a little bit, I mean, we've kind of hit the scope of the presentation, is really how are you dealing with supply chain impacts, price escalation, delay issues, and we want to make it a little bit holistic. So I was going to start with doing an overview of the type of contract clauses that you may either already have in play on your projects or that you may be negotiating as you're bidding out projects. And those, knowing what those contract considerations are, what the good, bad, indifferent type of clauses might be, are going to help you frame the problem. I think when we transition a little bit into some of the more real world solutions, our problem type of considerations and dialogue. So I am going to jump in. We had put a pre-bid discussion slide in here, and Nick, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're looking at when you're coming into the pre-bid on a project.
Yeah, for certain. I think it's extremely wise to have your estimating departments well-versed on this, discussing early and often with the client contacts and their pre-con departments. Talk about the budget and the financing for the job itself. Understand what they're trying to accomplish, the goal of the project, where the financing is coming from, the appetite for changes, the appetite for substitutions. Start having that conversation well before contract time, well before buyout time, during that pre-construction phase. Also, getting a copy of that prime agreement really does help you understand exactly what you're going to be held to as far as contract terms are concerned. And we have found almost universal success in just asking that question. Sometimes we have to ask a few times. Sometimes we have to ask more aggressively than others. But we do always get our hands on that because it's very important to understand. And our legal team, just like Kate provides to her clients, our legal team is invaluable in that process, helping us understand exactly what we're held to as part of the terms of the flow down or flow through.
And the interesting thing too is the interplay between understanding budget and financing and that prime agreement. Because if you're negotiating your contract based on what's flowing to you through the prime agreement, you may not be comfortable with some of the provisions that you're having to agree to. And you may be making a business decision about, okay, we don't like it, but we're going to agree to it on the risk analysis side of the world. And part of what is going to help you understand whether you're willing to agree to it is knowing budget and financing, understanding if the budget has enough built into it to be able to accommodate and float some of those cost impacts that we're talking about today, understanding that you are going to more likely than not get funded for the impact based on how the budget's been structured and what the financing looks like. So there's definitely a lot of interplay between the two. All right, so these are the key type of subheadings that you'll see for a lot of the different contract clauses that play into some of the different delay and escalation issues that we see right now. And so I just hit these off the top. I'm going to roll through with you some of the sample types of these clauses so that you have a good sense of where you're looking and the type of language that you may need to be negotiating, because it's going to potentially impact your ability to either cost recover for price escalation or to obtain a different additional scheduling time if you're experiencing a materials shortage or delay in production. So contractor sum sample clauses, there's a couple subcontract sum clauses. Usually it's got a subheading that literally says subcontract sum. But what you want to be keying into is whether or not you've got language in that clause that needs to be negotiated that says, and I kind of highlighted it here, that your subcontract sum is supposed to include all increases in cost foreseen or unforeseen. So this means you're buying off sort of the unknown. And the question is, whatever contingency you built into that subcontract sum, is it going to be sufficient for the market you're contracting in today based on your knowledge of materials fluctuations in your own market across, I would say, the last 6 months or longer. And here that's got you completely buying off on specifically any loss or damage arising from the work through unforeseen or unusual obstructions, difficulties, or delays which may be encountered in prosecution of the work through action of the elements shall be borne by the subcontractor. So this is really tying you pretty specifically and pretty hard to whatever your subcontract sum amount is. There may be other provisions in the contract that are going to allow you to increase your subcontract sum, but usually if you see language like what I have highlighted, where you're completely assuming the responsibility and the risk for increases, for unforeseen increases and delays, it's going to be pretty difficult to subsequently be able to negotiate out of a clause like this. Here's another subcontract sum sample clause. It is not as draconian as the last one because it doesn't include the unforeseen language, but it's pretty close because it's saying it's your sole compensation. You're guaranteeing that it's sufficient compensation to perform the work and all obligations without exception. There may still be other clauses in the contract that would form the exception in terms of an entitlement to an increase, but you still want to be, if you're seeing language like without exception, understanding what that means relative to the contract overall and whether or not you actually do have any other areas in the contract that are going to allow you to submit for a change order or escalation if there is a materials price increase. Duration and delay clauses are another one. Where you're being held specifically to whatever duration you've identified, and then that you're also acknowledging that you are subject to revisions on starts and durations without dispute or recourse of any nature. This is my favorite one. If the revised schedule results in unrealistic demands, subcontractor will within 1 working day provide a written explanation to contractor for review. I mean, depending on the size of the project and the number of schedule modifications you're seeing, you may not actually have the staffing to have people be able to key in and turn around on a revised schedule within 24 hours of receipt, 1 working day. I have plenty of clients who've said to me that they feel like it's just a paper war, that they've got so many schedules coming into the inbox, and then the schedules themselves don't actually specify, here's the impact to the roofer, here's the impact to the mason. What they're having to do is learn how to read the entirety of the schedule, determine where it impacts their work, and then try to identify within whatever amount of time that there's a schedule impact. So that 1 working day item is definitely one to think about trying to negotiate as you're looking at the contract off the front. Duration and delay. This is another type of duration and delay clause. Here's one where you have 48 hours to give notice of any delay that has occurred, including casualties for which subcontractor is not responsible. This kind of is where I would expect people to kind of shoehorn pandemic-related delay issues. The actual language that they're showing here is really more casualty, like an actual fire, lightning, tornado, hurricane casualty on-site damage. However, when I was reading through this contract, this was the only delay remedy that they were giving subcontractors at all. And so you'd have to be kind of dancing between the raindrops a little bit to be shoehorning any kind of delay for lost work time based on pandemic related or global supply chain related issues here. But again, you want to be trying to review these contracts to understand, if I have a supply chain issue, how am I going to get an extension on duration and delay? What clause does it fall under, and how much time is it giving me? So the last one was, are you getting an impact based on schedules that are revised and handed to you? This one is, how do you perfect a claim if you need additional for delay, if you need additional time for performance under the contract. Liquidated damages. This is another reason why it's so important to make sure you're getting a copy of the prime agreement. I have certainly read contracts that are silent as to the actual use of the phrase liquidated damages, and they simply say you're bound to the contractor as a subcontractor to the same manner and extent that the contractor is bound to the owner. If you just have that type of broad language, hey, I agree that I've adopted all of the terms of the prime agreement, that means you've also adopted liquidated damages, regardless of whether or not the phrase liquidated damages appears in your contract generally. This is a liquidated damages clause that comes directly from a general contract agreement with a subcontractor. And this one specifically says if you fail to complete your work within the time period, you'll pay to the contractor liquidated damages specified. If you have a liquidated damages clause, make sure you understand what it is, how much you're agreeing to, how much you're on the hook for, and what you need to do in order, again, to prove up and submit any type of delay claim or schedule completion claim. It can be pretty poisonous if you're on the hook for liquidated damages and you don't have a good understanding of how the liquidated damages were negotiated. Again, what the owner is expecting out of the contractor and what your own exposure is going to be. The reason I highlighted the second part under the bullet point, such payment is not a penalty, but is liquidation of the amount of damages. Liquidated damages clauses are only enforceable and valid if they specifically say, like, this isn't a penalty, because if it's created to be some kind of punitive clause where you're being penalized for failure to perform, and it is in excess of what would a reasonable amount of kind of consideration for lost profits, business, etc. would be, you can get a liquidated damages clause voided if you can show that it was somehow created as a punitive or a penalty approach. So that's just an interesting kind of footnote to liquidated damages clauses. Force majeure. This is, I laugh about this because this is like anti-force majeure provision right here. Contractor's not liable to subcontractor for anything. Interruptions to your work, delays, act, neglect on account of God or any on account of any acts of God. That's pretty much where a lot of the pandemic areas are falling into, or pandemic and supply chain delay issues are falling into acts of God to the extent that they don't get shoehorned in or have any other reference to pandemic or supply chain issues in the contract. This is where you see it. Usually a force majeure clause is going to talk about who can be entitled to any type of extension of time, no fault, or entitlement to additional fees or costs if there's a force majeure event. Most of what I see in a lot of contracts lately are sort of anti-force majeure clauses where they say, we're not liable to you for anything, or by the way, if something happens, you're specifically assuming all of the responsibility for the unforeseen event, sort of like what we looked at earlier on the subcontract sum amount. This is another type of anti-force majeure where you're saying contractor is not liable on or account of any acts of God or account of the failure to provide materials which may or may not have been ordered in a timely manner. This is interesting wording to me too, because I think this is a lot of where the fight can come down to if you are suffering a material delay production type of issue, because the fight can be, gee, if you had only timely ordered your materials, i.e. like the date that we signed this contract, even though you might not yet have had whatever, you might not have had approval on your submittals yet. That's where I think some of the fight can be in terms of what does timely ordering for materials look like in an economy where you know that there are known supply chain issues and you need to be timely providing them to the product site. So this is also an area where you can be building some extra contractual evidence about what timely manner looks like for materials ordering. And I wondered, Nick, like, what do you, when you're looking at materials supply and delivery for your project, what do you consider timely, and how are you kind of documenting that in your communications with your clients?
Well, you want to make sure you're starting that conversation just like any other conversation during pre-con. So we want our client to understand exactly how much escalation we have included in our bid and why. So if we've been made aware of recent escalations, forwarding those notifications onto the client, allowing them to see, hey, this is what's happening. This is what we're anticipating happening. This is what we're carrying. Making sure they understand that so that they can compare you apples to apples with one of your competitors that may or may not be carrying escalation costs. And then the client is able to make an informed decision about who to award the work to. It would seem that we would have a more robust package, including our escalations that we know are justified. So all that being said, say we're contracted for the job, we know we have escalation costs included. What do we then do as far as materials are concerned? Well, we're paying attention to that schedule. And Kate talked an awful lot about schedule notifications, schedule changes. That's my daily life. Our schedules are changing every day, all day, on every project. And so because everything's so dynamic, when we receive those schedule notifications or those schedule changes, ensuring that we start that conversation in writing, keeping a paper trail to say, okay, we understand that you're either moving things back or moving things up. If you're moving things back, there's potential escalation costs. If you're moving things up, there's a bunch of different ways for us to get around that. But let's just make sure we get those materials here in time. So what is in time? Asking those questions, making sure we have a date included, making sure we have a date documented, working with our suppliers and our relationships to ensure that we can get those materials by that time. And then if we can't, notifying everybody then, not 6-8 weeks down the line when the material doesn't show up, but notifying everybody that day. All right, listen, we're going to have some delays here. Here's all the information. So basically keeping transparency and keeping everything open so that everybody can make decisions collaboratively so that we don't have to go back to the black and white issues of the contract, but working together as a team to try to resolve these things in the real world with the many different decisions that we can make, different suppliers, different materials, all those types of things we'll talk about here in a moment.
Yep, and actually that's why I forwarded the slide while you were talking, because this is another one of those clauses we see, material availability, and you were already sort of touching on it with what you were describing, which is if you can come into the project and know that you already have the materials you need stocked and on site, then you're going to minimize some of your risk under a clause like the one I'm showing you, which is that you've satisfied yourself as to the availability and cost of all labor, materials, supplies, taken into account all of the factors that affect availability and cost of items, including shortages, market fluctuations, volatility, and that you have taken them all into account whatsoever that may affect the availability or cost of such items, to the extent that you can already minimize the risk that you have under an availability clause like this. That's going to be super, super impactful. Because this is probably one of the more draconian, and a lot of the ones I picked out for this portion of the session are kind of the more draconian clauses that you really want to be trying to key in on to say, can I really afford the risk of signing a contract with a clause that has me buying off on the entirety of the world of cost and availability? Substitutions is another one. This one is not as bad as some that I've seen. I couldn't find a really bad one on this one. Some of the substitutions clauses I see basically say, if you substitute anything for any reason, you become functionally a designer of the project. So now you're buying off on the actual design liability for selection of materials that you would otherwise probably consider to be an architectural or engineer type of design exposure for the project. This one just says, if you're providing a substitution, you're going to give a warranty that's the same or better terms as specified, which is something to be aware of, and be knowing that you're able to provide a warranty on same or better terms, but not as bad, I think, as some burdens if you're providing a substitution. And of course, substitutions come into play when you are facing any kind of material shortage and you're trying to look at a way to keep your project on schedule and keep it supplied and moving forward. Unit prices, this is another one to take a look at. If you've got a unit prices clause in your contract, it may or may not also exist with your subcontract sum price, but this is the one that says you're going to hold all unit pricing for the duration of the project, and it's going to apply to your change orders as well. So now you could potentially see yourself eroding whatever cushion you put in as part of your O&P, as part of your contingency on your bid, if you're 6 months a year, 2 years into the project and you've got change orders for additional work. All right, that kind of gets me through the initial, here are the subcontract clauses to be keying in on as you're either reviewing to negotiate, or if you're already in a position where you're under contract on a project and are now dealing with either material escalations or delay issues. So I wanted to flip to a couple bid clause recommendations. These are ones that I've kind of recommended to my clients that they think about including in their bids to begin with, that they include a price escalation clause in their terms and conditions. And then, of course, if that's what's in your signed bid, you want your bid to be incorporated into the contract as a contract document or countersigned so that it just becomes the contract. And if neither of those two things are happening, then you want to try to negotiate terms like this, if you can at all, into the contract proper. So this first one, client acknowledges that markets are experiencing significant industry-wide economic fluctuations impacting price of materials to be supplied. That, I think, is helpful from the jump in any type of bid, so that you're keying in on the issue, like you said, Nick, at the beginning of a conversation, that this could potentially increase the time of the cost in between the underlying bid and the date of the purchase. And that if the cost of any given material increases in excess, and this is subject to discretion, excess of 5% of the amount shown in the bid for the material, then you're going to have a change order. The reason I like to put in a percentage is this is a way of making it an our problem conversation, Nick, where you're saying, okay, I'm going to share in some of the price impact because I'm going to eat up that first 5% on the escalation, but we're acknowledging that at some point in time there isn't enough contingency. And it becomes a problem that is, if you are the owner and you want to get this project built, then you've got to be showing up and paying for the true cost of your materials. Nick, have you worked at all on, have you been successful with this type of clause in any of your bid proposals?
Getting it incorporated into the contract is for sure the tough part. We do have sort of a catch-all summary at the beginning of our proposals, have for quite a long time. We're advised to by our attorney for the same reasons you're documenting. And so, yeah, it's been the word and the constant message to our clients for quite a long time now. But getting that into the contract has been difficult, typically because of the issue we talked about at the very beginning, the flow down provisions. So if the GC is not capable of recovering costs from the owner because they are held to terms that don't allow them for that sort of recovery, then we have little to no hope of obtaining those things as well. So handling that in such a way as including the potential escalation in the bid price, ensuring that everyone is aware of the contingency that we're holding, and then moving forward has been one of the more realistic ways that we've seen happen. But yeah, actually getting something like this in the contract has been really difficult.
I'm going to forward to another second clause I have. This one deals with delay and substitutions, but I think that's been the experience of my clients too. In some ways, including these in your bid proposal is a way of flagging an issue, understanding that if you get somebody to sign it 1 out of 10 times, you're doing great in terms of contract negotiation. And maybe that one time is going to be the time that you're extra glad you have it. Sometimes, though, it's more of a sacrificial shot across the bow, maybe, in terms of a proposed clause, knowing that even if you can't get it incorporated, you will have flagged the issue and you will have started the communication about what and how this is going to be handled on the project. And maybe after there's some robust communication about escalation and delay, you make a business decision that either you are willing to undertake the risk or maybe you're not, because I think sometimes the process of the communication on that contract negotiation helps you understand that this might not be a client or a contractor that you ultimately want to be doing business with. And that's the other thing too. Have you felt this, Nick, that sometimes you can have a gut feeling at the beginning of a negotiation or a contract where you say, this is the type of project that is just going to be a problem from start to finish. And after you've gone through a couple of those projects, you're maybe better able to say now, like, you know what, this is more than I want to sign up for with this type of personality or this type of contractor.
Oh, for certain. Yeah, if things feel tight from the very beginning, there's really no hope that things will loosen up. I think that you should, trust your instinct, trust your gut on those types of things. If you're having discussions during pre-con that are already difficult before you even contracted, they're going to get that much more difficult during the time of contracting, and then for sure even that much more difficult when it comes to the implementation of the project. So I think understanding that, knowing the risks that you're taking, making those counter gut decisions, and knowing that those decisions could come back to bite you as far as profitability is concerned, it's very real. It happens on a daily basis. I know many people, ourselves included, that have signed contracts and said to ourselves, why did we actually do that?
I think probably you and I are, just in terms of age and career wise, right at that place of, we've grown out of being young punks who can't be told anything by by our elders, who are like, now you listen to me. And I've started to turn into that, nope, I've seen enough about it. I'm willing to listen to the voice of experience a little bit more, and understand that there are going to be times where I need to listen to my gut about a client or a case, or whether or not there's something I'm going to actually agree to do, because you can't just always assume you're going to be able to get through it and make it right. All right, so this is a delay and substitution clause recommendation. So the last one dealt with mandatory price increases if there was a material escalation cost. This one is delay and substitutions. So this one addresses questions on timing of delivery or unavailability of a product. The first one is that same type of language, asking for specific acknowledgement on the impact on the market. The second bullet point deals with having a mandatory change order to increase completion time commensurate with delay if there's a delivery or unavailability issue. The other thing I put in here is that in that instance, they're going to waive and relinquish claims for consequential liquidated damages or business loss. Nick, you already pointed out there are contractors who say, no, I'm tied under the prime to these type of damages. I'm never going to waive them as it relates to the subcontractor. And so there is that last bullet point clause there that is kind of designed to address that. If you can't get a waiver on liquidated damages or business loss, what you can look at is potentially trying to get a cancellation on the contract proper, which would be if it's canceled without reschedule for materials delay, either party can cancel the contract on written notice to the other party, and no damages may be sought or assessed arising from such cancellation. This is a type of fallback provision. I like to try and get both of them in if possible, but to the extent that you can allow yourself a way to exit the project if you are facing materials delivery delays that were unanticipated and that you can't actually. Oh, sorry, I was just looking to see if we had a chat. Nobody's chatting with us. But if you have materials delay that's pervasive and are looking at a contract that you haven't otherwise allowed yourself an opportunity or option to cancel, this, if you can get it, this is a good way to introduce that concept. And then that third bullet point, contractor releases subcontractor from any and all liability arising from substitution due to availability or delayed delivery, with the exception of claims related to failure to install per a manufacturer installation. This one I introduced because of that concept of some contracts will say, if you provide any type of substitution proposal whatsoever, you then start to bear responsibility or liability for design of the project itself. This is to help you stay out of that design hat type of damages scenario. And that's one where, most contractors are not also carrying errors and omissions policies, which would cover you for any type of liability you'd have arising from an argument that you had made an improper substitution and that you were therefore carrying responsibility as a designer for the substitution. So I think those are kind of my recommendation summaries. Yep. On what you can be trying to incorporate into your contracts, how you're looking at your contracts as you're setting the table for dealing with a delay issue or a price escalation issue. And so we thought we'd move into a little bit more of the how are you dealing with this during your regular day-to-day business approaches as you encounter these issues, Nick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the last slide you brought up was it spoke true to my daily life, and we'll go over those things in just a little bit. But let's talk about during the buyout phase. So, say you've been the successful bidder, contractor's really interested in moving forward with you, and we're ready to go, right? So, what exactly are we going to have in the terms of the contract, or what kind of conversations have we had with the client regarding those material price escalations? Making sure that those conversations are, and when I say conversations, I always mean in writing. Folks, put this stuff in writing. Even if you have phone conversations, memorialize that with some sort of document. Put things in meeting minutes. Make sure that you're memorializing all these conversations so that should the need arise sometime later, you can provide some record that that conversation took place.
Please do it in email and not in text messages. That's one that's killed me lately is people are like, oh yeah, well, we're mostly just texting on this job. I'm like, great, where are the texts? Well, my cell phone carrier can't pull them anymore and I don't have that phone. Like,
yeah, that doesn't do a lot of good if you don't have record of it. Yeah, so exactly. Let's assume from now on, when I say conversations, I'm talking about some sort of documented conversation. And making sure that you're having those early and often. And like I was saying earlier, actually forwarding notifications onto the client so that they understand it's not just absolute saying that we're going to have issues. It's no, you don't understand. I got 7 today. I got 7 today that tell me that costs are going to go up over the next 15 days or 30 days or whatever it is. So just making you aware that if we're going to make this decision, we're going to make it soon, and we're going to award off the last set of drawings that we're talking about the same price, and we're talking about what kind of escalation I've included.
I am going to forward us to the next slide because this is a little bit, we're still talking a little pre, buyout phase. I'm going to forward us. So when the project is already underway, have you talk about this for a minute. And then I want to go to some of the chat comments that we've gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that. Value engineering, folks. Obviously, we have the ability to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. Now, Kate had put up a slide regarding substitutions, right? So we all know that there's verifiable and equal manufacturers out there, products that are equivalent. We need to make sure that we're following all the proper substitution procedures, spec required substitution procedures, but making recommendations on some sort of value engineering decision based on a multitude of factors. You could not have the material available at all. Kate had made reference to that. During this epidemic, it happened to me more than once. I literally had to tell my client that they either had to switch the material or we just don't do the project because the material that is specified and was bought out does not exist. It's a very strange time. I'm sure you've all experienced similar things. The material literally isn't in production currently. There's no raw materials. There's no ability to send those materials. There's no trucking, distribution, shipping, etc. We cannot install that material. So let's work together as a team to figure out something else.
And if you get pushback on a message like that, it doesn't exist, and they want to point you to any of the contract terms, remember that impossibility is a defense to contract performance. I mean, they're even though from the legal standpoint, we have to start off the jump as to the actual written terms of the contract. And even though you might have something like one of those materials availability clauses that's basically like, yeah, we agree, everything is going to be our fault, you still have extra contractual legal arguments, and impossibility of performance is one. So you've got that in your pocket if you need to whip out some lawyery sounding kind of terms when you're having that conversation.
Sure. Any reasonable project superintendent's going to want to keep things moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to leverage the right people to push the right people, perhaps a project manager wouldn't want to make that decision, but you talk to a superintendent and say the schedule is going to be delayed. You're literally not going to be able to accomplish this part of the project. Everything's going to be delayed. You put that in writing, help everybody understand that this could result in liquidated damages. Not at our fault. Like you're saying, Kate, we don't have access. It's not possible. So those things can kind of roll downhill. And if you get the reasonable people involved and the people that are incentivized to get things going, I've seen a lot of really, good responses.
So let's go to the comments. I want to, if everybody can see, Mark Cohn is talking a little bit about a GC material increase he's had because there was a project delay. He quoted the project December 2020, supposed to start February 2021. quote was good to June 2021. Project started around September 2021. So now you've got somebody who wants you to make good on a quote for materials that were only good till June, and you might have already signed it, but it doesn't, if you can't order until they tell you to go, you're outside of your quote time period on materials. That's awful. The roofers got hit pretty badly. I can't remember which manufacturer it was, but the manufacturer just said, it doesn't matter that we said our quote was good to whatever date. We're no longer honoring those quotes based on the market and the substitutions. And that was pretty difficult for a lot of my roofing subcontractors to be trying to push upstream in existing projects when their material supplier said, yeah, we don't care. We're not honoring quotes.
Kate, if you forward the slide, I think I do have somewhat of an answer to Mark's question.
Ooh. Here we go. Deals with suppliers.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few different ways that I've been able to establish either predetermined rates or able to honor quotes, etc. So pre-purchasing and stocking, of course, if you don't have the facilities to do that, that's not really an option. Sometimes you can talk to your client about stocking on site, billing for stored materials, or even just bringing them to your supplier's house and billing for stored materials. Obviously, sometimes you have to pay for storage fees, insurance fees, etc. If you have a good relationship with suppliers, sometimes you can get that for free. But yeah, pre-purchasing those at the predetermined rates and then holding on to those materials, stockpiling them, right? Making sure your name is on those materials. Obviously, billing for stored materials on site is a really kind of the most beneficial way to do things. It's in the contractor's purview. They can literally see it. We have the materials. They're already purchased at the price that we agreed upon. They're just sitting there ready to get installed whenever things are ready. I've seen that really be the best thing. Now, that provides all sort of accounting issues that your controllers can be mad at you about, but you can resolve those at the end of the year. You can discuss inventory and all that sort of thing. But it's not the easiest thing in the world from an accounting perspective. But if it's going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars, I say pull the trigger every time. And then, of course, talking, like I said, early and often communication. That's key on all this stuff. So making sure you're talking to your manufacturers. When's the last possible day I can order this material at the price that we agreed upon? Making sure that day is communicated to the client so that they understand what the drop dead date is and so that they're part of the team making decision. All right, listen, I got to order this. It's going to be here this day. You need to make room. It's going to be on your job site. Not really asking questions, but saying this has to be the way that this functions. We got to work together as a team. Otherwise, we're not going to have the materials to do this job, right? So making sure you're using all three of those key items at your disposal and making sure that you're actually making team decisions with the client involved, helping them understand. I saw a question earlier, what if you get pushback on that? Just forward those emails, forward that documentation, forward anything. I don't hesitate to be as transparent as possible and share as many things as I can to help people understand this is not coming from me. I'm on your side. I'm trying to help you accomplish this. I'm getting pushback from my suppliers, my manufacturer, whoever it is. Let's work together, Mr. Superintendent, and make this happen.
And if you're doing on-site stored materials, you'll also want to look and see if you have any contract clauses that deal with stored material responsibility in terms of who is liable or has responsibility if the materials are lost, stolen, damaged, kind of stuff. I mean, they're not really going to get lost on site, but they will get stolen or damaged. So look and see who needs to be protecting or has liability if that happens. You might still, again, on the risk reward side of the world, decide that you're still willing to buy off on the lesser likelihood of damage or theft versus having to eat a price escalation or delay issue that you weren't prepared for.
To Kate's point, making sure that you're getting the entire policy and the manual in your hands from the contractor, whether it's a wrap project or not, helping you understand where your general liability. Is it on you? Is it on somebody else? Is it on the insuring party? Who actually owns the ownership and who's liable for whatever's going to happen? And making sure you understand that before you ever sign that contract so that if, for example, you're having your insurance agent review that policy and you identify some onerous policy that's going to put you on the hook, well, include an allowance for that type of thing, right? Making sure you're seeing all potential costs at the front end. Gaining access to those documents before you ever send out a qualified bid it's really difficult to do all these things. And sometimes people don't even have the RAP policy or the RAP manual in place for you to be able to do that. But making sure you're having those discussions either at contracting time or contract discussion time, getting revisions to the manual, getting, cost escalations included. Say you have to up your pollution insurance by $2 million per occurrence, because that's just what the RAP says. You got to make sure that the cost associated with that is going to be wrapped up into something. And if you don't have access to those documents in time, then you're not going to be able to do that.
So we kind of segued into a key principle of risk management is understand the risk that's inherent in the contract. So if you've got a contract clause that says, guess what, Nick, you have bought off all responsibility for stored materials on site under the contract, then Nick's talking about turning around and looking at whether his general liability policy is going to insure him for that risk. So a risk transfer onto the insurance policy that you have in place, or looking to see if there's a RAP policy that's protecting the project that maybe you're required to pay into to determine if that RAP policy is going to insure you for risk on stored materials. So it's that risk transfer of, what have I bought off on, and is there a way I can insure it or pass it along to somebody else? If you're utilizing a subcontractor, your own subcontractor on the site, then you'll also try to flow it through to that subcontractors under your contract and under their policy. I'm going to go back a couple. I think, were we done talking with value engineering?
Yeah, for sure. And I believe that we had spoke about, go ahead and forward it to that next one. Let me make sure I hit up on this. Yeah, we had talked about all this. Yep. And then doing this early. We always talk about doing things early and often, making sure that you're taking a look at these specs and understanding before you even get to the point of knowing whether or not you need to submit a substitution request, what's in there. Are there already approved equals? Do you already have something at your disposal? If the material is not available, can you easily just make a recommendation to move to one of the other spec'd items? Also, are there no other equals? Is this a completely sole specified and unequaled material? If so, the design has to change, right? At that point, if you're saying I'm doing a substitution request for an unequal product and we are changing design, that then becomes a design liability issue. You have to ensure that you're not, like Kate was saying earlier, that design is not actually coming back on you, that decision is being made by a third-party engineer through a review process, whatever it is, right? The design team is actually making that decision for convenience or for a cause. Say the sole spec material doesn't exist. But making sure that you're following those procedures, getting all the documentation that's needed, and making sure you're doing it in a timely manner starts with your spec review to know if you're even going to need to do that in the first place. So making sure you got a good understanding of whether or not you're going to have access to things, having early conversations with your suppliers and manufacturers, and understanding whether or not that material is going to be available when the schedule shows it's supposed to go.
Especially if you're dealing with any type of cladding component that has to be tied in or integrated to another piece of cladding. I mean, that's building envelope kind of stuff seems to be where I see the most of the litigation on the back end. That's really where it becomes such a problem in terms of, did you install what was specified? Did you install per the manufacturing specifications? If you made a substitution, did you figure out how the substitution was actually going to tie into the existing design? And then did you get it blessed by your actual designers, the architects and engineers? When that doesn't happen, and then water is in your building somehow through one of those components, that's such a prescription for disaster on those type of cases, because now you've got your general liability insurance carrier saying, nope, this is actually design liability. You changed the material. You didn't get it approved. You didn't ensure that it was tied in properly with this other component. So it's not a construction error, and it's not something we're going to insure you for under your general liability policy. It's something you bought off on design, and by the way, that's not covered. So now you're in sort of this uncovered damages territory on liability, which is a terrible place to be.
For your ops people, staying away from this will work language or this does the trick language. Rather, this should work, but let's get approval from an engineer or an architect. This should do the trick, but I'm not sure, and I really want to have the design team take a look at this and tell us whether or not it's blessed. Because, yeah, like Kate said, you could send an email and said, this is the stuff, it's going to do the trick, we're good to go. And then no follow-up ever. And then 3 years down the line, that's the email they show that Nick Williams said this was going to work, and basically said as a design professional of the language that this could do the trick. That would
Nick Williams.
cut down on my shoulders for sure.
Exactly. Let's see. So I want to get back to Dalton's comment, the first one in the chat, but sort of the most comprehensive. How many owners push back on or dispute whether or not price escalations have occurred and won't agree to pay for them? I mean, all of them, right? If anybody can get away with a pushback and saying, you know what, this was not a price escalation, it should have been included in your bid in terms of your contingency from the beginning, or if there was a price escalation, this is on you because you are have failed to timely order the materials. That's what I see a lot. If you had only timely ordered the materials, then we wouldn't have had this problem. Therefore, it's not a price escalation, it's a performance issue and you're in breach. That I think is the biggest thing I see in terms of owners trying to say they don't have to pay for it. So Nick, you already hit it on early and often communication and saying, here it is, here's the escalation, here it's coming. The language that I proposed earlier about, look, if it exceeds 5% of what we have built into our bid here in terms of an escalation, then you agree you're going to give me the change order, can also help. But I think that this comes back a little bit too to the way you structure your bid to begin with, because if you are just doing a fixed price bid and you weren't planning on having to disclose actual costs to your owner as part of project performance, then I think you can get into a little bit of a pickle on proving escalation too.
Real world anecdotal evidence. We have a project that's been delayed as far as financing and even contracting. And we're talking about a year now. Well, you can imagine how much materials have increased over the last year. Mm-hmm. Every time we receive a material increase notification, we forward it to the client so that they can share it with their owner. So that because they're on the same page as us, our client's in the same spot, right? They're going to take costs, mark them up, send them up to the owner. So we want to make sure that we're communicating. We have an advocate on our side saying, here, Mr. GC, this is what's going to happen. Here's the drop dead date. If we're not contracted by this date, we cannot hold this price. That date is passed. Here's the new drop dead date. If we're not, the date of issuance of a contract, post dating a date of a drop dead increase, material increase, is pretty good evidence that, yes, in fact, we've increased our material cost and you guys chose to make the decision to not contract in time. So we are now talking about a different dollar amount. But continuing to make those deadlines very clear, communicating often, making sure that you're open, transparent. We've seen really good luck with that.
All right, let's bring it home with Mark's comment. Yes, my blue walls are very calming. They do.
Mark, it's funny. I've made that comment before.
My team calls my office the aquarium when we're on team calls. So yeah, it's maybe not as lawyery as some at-home offices are, but I decided I wanted something I would enjoy. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We always appreciate all the input on the chat. Nick, thanks so much for working on this presentation with me. I really enjoyed all of the conversations we had getting ready for it also.
Kate, you're welcome. Thank you very much for everything you do for Absolute and the association, and look forward to working with you again.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you all live and in person this year too.